Have you seen the ghost of John? Long white bones with the skin all gone. Ooh, ooh, wouldn't it be chilly with no skin on? Hello, guys and gals, and welcome to another video for skills and abilities. Today, if you can't guess by the song, we're going to be going over the Ray's skeleton. Obviously, he's got no skin on his bones, and his bones are just flapping about in the breeze. You got to tell these guys, putting their bones away. The Ray's skeleton is a great skill for the Necromancer and is actually utilized on multiple Necromancer builds, not just the Necromancer, summon, but, you can utilize it very well in the Poison Tree. You can utilize it very well as a Bone Spear Necromancer. You can do all sorts of things with the skeletons. They're just kind of like a free army. And as we go over them today, I think you'll understand that they're pretty sweet guys, and they do require a little bit of tweaking to get them in their best form. So one of the things about the skeletons that we go over first is that the skeletons do require a corpse to be summoned. And one of the easiest ways, if you have this portal available to you, is the Pindleskin portal. It doesn't matter what kind of character you are. Whether you're a poison necromancer, a summon necromancer, or a bone necromancer, free corpses is free corpses. So let's take our character in here real quick, and I just want to show you what it's like to get yourself some free corpses. So right now we have level 32 raised skeleton, so we're looking at 12 skeletons total. And if we go into the Neolithic portal, you notice that there's already dead bodies on the ground, so we're just going to go ahead and summon up our 12 skeletons. And this is great because it's free. We ain't gotta do anything. So I was able to get 10 skeletons off. A little bit of faster cast can help you there to get more skeletons summoned quicker because it's a strict timer. So as you summon your skeletons, obviously they're getting prepared to get up. One of the things that you'll notice about your skeletons is they do have different graphics. Even in the old version of the game, you have some that have the round shields. You have some that have the kind of like the kite shields. Some of them have a saber, and there's also ones that will have like a hook and like a little spike, and there's all sorts of little variations to the skeletons. It's actually pretty cool, and I've noticed that level seems to have a lot to do with their appearance. It's almost as if they're given different weapons depending on like what level you summon them at, because it seems like when you summon them at lower levels, they get different equipment, which is kind of cool. I would actually really like to see some maybe with like two-handed weapons eventually, if they wanted to like add that in, and maybe some that have like a big axe or throw in like some other cool stuff they could potentially wear, like maybe have some moth-eaten boots on their feet. That could be interesting. But enough about that. Let's talk about the skeletons themselves. So the skeletons are not very powerful by themselves. In fact, if you only build the skeleton skill and not skeleton mastery along with it, you're going to end up with some really bad skeletons, and it's not going to really go very well for you. Generally, if you're going to build skeletons, you need to put 20 points into the skeletons and 20 points into skeleton mastery. As you're leveling up, if you don't have 20 points for both yet, you're always better off putting it into skeletons and not skeleton mastery. So skeleton mastery improves the skeletons, but it does not improve them better than the skill itself does. So you want to make sure you dump all your points into raised skeleton first, and then dump your points into skeleton mastery afterward, because it has a huge bearing on the survivability and the damage output of the skeletons and how they affect you, like as you're leveling up. When you get raised skeleton to its max level, then you're going to start dumping points into skeleton mastery. But don't get me wrong, always at least put 1 point into Skeleton Mastery. So, you want to dump your points into Raised Skeleton, but you want to at least put 1 point into Skeleton Mastery because obviously your plus to skills and things like that will have a nice benefit for your skeletons. And you don't want to have +5 to all skills and you're not getting anything from your Skeleton Mastery at all, because you could potentially be getting 6 Skeleton Mastery to your level 19 skeletons. The other thing to take note of here is that the damage plus 203% that's written on the skill is off weapon ED and is calculated in to the damage on the skeleton. So if you're ever trying to figure out the damage of your skeletons, like the overall damage of your skeletons, maybe you have a merc with concentration aura, or maybe you have a merc with might, or maybe you have a merc that has fanaticism and, might aura or something. I don't know how you're going to pull that off, but, whatever way that you're pulling things off, whether you're using a beast yourself, and then you have a might merc with a pride, with concentration, and you've got all these off-weapon ED modifiers, you cannot apply the off-weapon ED modifiers to the damage that's written here. The damage that's written here is already modified by the 203% that's written on the ability. And this means that if you apply the off-weapon ED that you have in the form of might or concentration or fanaticism or anything else that could be beefing them up, you're going to get the wrong number. I went over this in my Might Aura video. I talked about this in detail. And what you have to actually do is you have to look up the raw damage of a skeleton before all of the modifiers, which is kind of hard to get your hands on. And then you can calculate in the off-weapon ED with all the other sources and try and figure out what the actual damage of your skeletons are. But basically what you do is you multiply your damage, right? So if I have, for instance, 12 total skeletons, I'm going to want to multiply my damage out to figure out how much damage I'm doing per rotation. So if all of my skeletons, if all 12 of my skeletons have got their sword up in the air and they swing at the same time, how much damage am I doing basically per rotation of the skeleton's swing? And we're going to take a look at that real quick because I feel like that's a good thing to look at. So let's take a look at our calculator, which is for some reason way too big. I don't know why it's so big, but there we go. Got a little bit more down to size. So right now we have a skeleton damage of 363 per skeleton. All right, so they're swinging 363 damage. I don't have any other modifiers to give them right now, so that's their damage output. So we're going to take 363 and we're going to multiply that by 12 skeletons, and we're going to come up with a very nice number of 4,356 damage per rotation. So if every single skeleton swings his sword and every single skeleton hits his target, I'll be doing 4,356. If I cast Amplified Damage on the target, which is obviously going to help me out in damage tremendously because it's a plus 100% damage taken, it reduces the monster's defense to physical resistance by 100%. I could potentially be doing even more. So you multiply that 4,356 times 2, and you come up with 8,712 for our total damage per rotation with Amplify. All right, so that's just the skeletons by themselves. So that's not calculating in other effects like I said, might aura, concentration, fanaticism, and fanaticism can increase the speed of the skeletons as well. So, we have other things to consider here, which are going to beef that up even more. We could, of course, go higher on the plus to skills and get our skeletons even higher. So maybe we have something like an Arm of King Leoric, which is going to give us a lot more plus to skills. Not only will it give us +2 to summoning, that's 2, and give us +3 to skeletons, so that's 5. So we got a very nice 5 to skeletons. We're also getting +5 to skeleton mastery. So something like this can massively beef up our damage even further, because not only is it giving us plus to skills to one thing, it's giving us plus to skills to 2 things, which are affecting the way our skeletons dish out damage. And so now, if we take a look at our skeletons, notice we've now gone from that rather meager 363 to a much more beefy 507, which is definitely a lot more than it was before. And then we take those numbers and we run 507 in the calculator, and you'll see that small damage increases, like going from 363 to 507, has a really big effect on the way it works. And not only have we gained damage, we've also gained more skeletons. So we went from 12 skeletons to 14. So now we have the ability to multiply it by 14 instead of by 12, and we go to 7,098 damage per rotation, and then we multiply that by 2 for amplify damage, and we end up with 14,196 damage per rotation, which is pretty incredible, especially considering we don't have any other modifiers in place. We don't have things like, you know, our might or our concentration or our fanaticism aura in play. Now, of course, this is if your skeletons hit all at the same time. And this is important because on the battlefield, when you're fighting monsters, defense and attack rating and all these things come into play. And so there's a very good chance that maybe your skeletons suck and they don't hit their targets, which is why things like Blessed Aim, Conviction, things that reduce defense of the enemy, like for instance, maybe you have Inner Sight on a mercenary, you know, maybe you're running a Faith Bow Merc that runs Inner Sight. All of these things can come in handy to make sure that your skeletons are actually hitting their targets, which is, of course, is going to be very, very nice to make sure that they're actually dishing out the damage that they're supposedly capable of. Now, let's take a situation here. Let's go ahead and grab Amplify Damage, because why not? And I want you to notice that, you know, we've got like 4 skeletons over here attacking this one guy. We've got like 3 over here attacking this guy. This one's attacking this bird, and so forth and so on. And so what ends up happening is it's not quite as good as the numbers would suggest. So when you're looking at your army, what you're noticing is your army is spread out all over the place. They're doing whatever the hell they want to do. So your 14,000 damage per rotation doesn't seem so awesome when you realize that they're spreading out their damage to everything nearby, and it's just kind of like, you know, not enough butter on, you know, too much bread. And then you go to eat the buttered bread, and it's like, is there even butter on this bread? So the problem becomes that they can't really focus their damage on a target, and this is an issue. How do you fix this issue? Well, one of the easiest ways that you can focus your skeletons on a particular target is to do what's called a Telestomp. You don't necessarily need an Enigma, so don't immediately go to an Enigma because that's not what we require. What we require is any item that has teleport on it. And let me see if I can drum a teleport item up real quick. I'm sure I have one laying around somewhere. All right, so here we go. We're in a very similar situation to before. And I want to focus my damage on a particular target. So now that I have a teleport skill, which you don't necessarily need Enigma to pull this off, you just need any teleport item, but I just grabbed an Enigma because, you know, it's a video. So here we have a particular monster that I want them to focus on. So I want them to focus on Eldritch. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to teleport directly on top of Eldritch. And notice how my entire army is now focused in one little spot. It's called Telestomping, and all of them are attacking the same targets pretty much because they're all in the same exact place. And they're focusing their damage more readily on 1 or 2 specific targets, which is enabling them to actually apply their damage more efficiently than they would otherwise. Now, of course, you can enable them to be even more tanky. You can enable them to do even more damage. This is not really a good example of like their maximum damage output. This is more or less just showing you that you can, of course, focus their damage in one spot. To make them tankier, you're going to have to put points into summon resistance. So as you notice, I don't have any points in that yet, and my skeletons were dying pretty readily. So summon resistance gives your skeletons a pretty healthy dose of resistances, which is going to keep them alive for a lot of through a lot of monsters. So you pretty much have to put at least 1 point into summon resistance. Now, early game, before you get a lot of plus to skills, okay, a whole lot of plus to skills, you need to put at least about 5 points into summon resistance. After you get a large amount of plus to skills, I don't recommend you dumping anything more than 1 or 2 points into summon res. And the reason is because it scales off relatively fast. You'd get very little benefit from dumping points into summon resistance if you have a large number of plus to skills. And usually, if you're a summon Necromancer, you have a large number of plus to skills. But early on, especially when you're in normal difficulty and nightmare difficulty, and you're trying to fight like Diablo in normal difficulty with a summon Necromancer, you need as many points in a summon resistance as you can get. I would put anywhere between 5, maybe even 6 or 7 points into summon resistance in normal difficulty as a summon Necromancer. Later, when you get to Nightmare and Hell difficulty and you finally have, like a decent wand, you've got decent plus to skills, you've got a nice, maybe you've finally got yourself a, like a spirit shield or something like that. Whatever it is that you're running and you finally now have plus to skills, you can take that out. You don't have to keep that in there. But only level 1 summon resist early on in the game, your skeletons are going to die all the time. I actually have a video where I literally took a normal difficulty Necromancer from level 1 to Diablo, and I show everybody basically just how terrible your skeletons are versus Diablo with basically no summon resistance. And then I take that same Necromancer and I pump up his summon resistance so it's a little bit higher, around 5 to 6. And I take that same Necromancer and I kill the normal Diablo with that summon Necromancer using skeletons. And it makes such a huge difference on normal difficulty because your skeletons are just really weak to just about any kind of elemental damage. And as you know, Diablo, he loves to spam elemental damage. That's his entire gag. So summon resistance becomes really important in normal. And then as you transition to Nightmare and Hell difficulty, you don't really have to worry about it so much. You can kind of lean off of it and you can take it back down to 1 point once you get the right plus to skills. And skeletons are eminently replaceable. So as long as they're not dying so fast, you can obviously replace them at any time. You can throw, another skeleton up anytime you have a new body on the ground. And that's pretty much what you're going to do as a summon Necromancer. You're going to be constantly replacing the skeletons. So every single time you have skeletons dying, you don't really worry so much about the fact that they're dying unless they're dying so fast that you can't replace them. So you're basically, what you're doing is you're utilizing their damage to obviously beef your army up. You may have other sources of damage, like maybe you've got your clay golem in there. You have your mercenary, which I don't have a mercenary, by the way. Maybe you even have your mages, which is a whole nother video, and we'll talk about mages one day in another video. And they're going to stand behind, and they're going to do a pretty decent amount of damage. But the skeletons aren't really there to, like, pull the weight of the entire character. Like, if that was the case, I could just sit here with my hands off the keyboard and do nothing, and they would just do everything by themselves. And it's not really the case. Skeletons are meant to be an augment to other effects that you might have. Like, for instance, your revives, your clay golems, your raised skeletal mage, whatever main ability you've chosen, and also corpse explosion. Corpse explosion is probably one of the easiest skills to build on just about every single character. And the goal of this is literally just to make it so that you have, the ability to explode corpses while you're standing there doing nothing. I mean, I can't do anything while my skeletons are in here beating up everything. Like, what am I going to do? Run in here with my wand and start whacking away at something? This gives me something else to do so that I can apply some extra damage while they're sitting there, doing their thing, and collapse the field of monsters a little bit tighter. And like I said earlier, I can always teleport directly on top of one particular monster so that they should dish out faster damage on that particular monster, kind of micromanaging them a little bit better. And this definitely comes in handy. I mean, as you can see, they're all on top of each other, and they are just all swinging away on one particular target. I mean, look at it. It's beautiful. It's absolutely gorgeous watching all those skeletons just go to work and just maloiter. And you could, of course, do this with your full army. You can have a full army of mages. You can have a full army of revives. You can have your clay golem in there, and that way that when you teleport on top of a person, or a monster or whatever it may be, you've got this massive army which crushes down on top of them, and you're basically just relying on the fact that everything is hitting that one particular monster all at the same time. You throw your amp damage on there, and then everything just melts. I mean, every time you telestomp on top of something, you're gonna see it just burn down super super fast, because that's the power of focusing your entire army onto one particular monster. Now, there's a lot of ways that you can augment them, and we were talking about some of those earlier, things like running a Beast Axe, which would give you Fanaticism Aura. You could also have a Mercenary that has Might Aura, which is going to increase their physical damage. You can obviously run a Pride Weapon, which has Concentration, or the new Mist Bow, which has Concentration, which is definitely going to help them out. Conviction doesn't help them out so much, but it does decrease the amount of defense that the monsters have, which does make the attacks more likely to land, which is a minor benefit. Some people will argue that having Conviction versus having Pride and Might and all these other things is the better choice, because it ups the total percent of hits that your skeletons do. I think there's some calculations out there for that where some people say that Infinity is the superior choice, but it's definitely not the cheapest choice. Let me tell you that much. You're definitely going to have a lot easier time coming by like a Mist Bow than you ever have coming by something like a Infinity. Another way that you can beef up the damage of your skeletons is with Enchant. Whether a sorceress casts it, which is the superior version, by the way, or whether you cast it, or whether you have the new Act 3 mercenary who casts it as well, the fire damage is actually a very interesting component, because what happens is your little enchant merc is going to enchant every single one of your skeletons, and the fire damage that's added to your skeletons is cumulative. The same way earlier that we were talking about how each individual skeleton doesn't really do that much damage, but when multiplied over the number of skeletons, it adds up to a whole lot. Same thing with the enchant. So let's take a look at the enchant mark real quick, and let's see what kind of enchant, like a base fire enchant merc has. So we've got a level 98 fire merc here, and without putting any equipment on them, which is definitely what you would do if you're going to run an enchant merc, is you would put a whole bunch of equipment on them to beef this enchant up higher, because you want it as high as humanly possible. But right now, it's 248 fire damage, 210 to 248 fire damage, with a very nice bonus to attack rating, which is going to, obviously, the same way that Conviction does, is going to help their to-hit ratio, which means that you're more likely going to have your skeletons landing hits as opposed to not. So the Enchant Merc makes a very interesting choice for a Summon Necromancer these days, because he's going to sit there and enchant every single one of your skeletons. So let's multiply out how much fire damage is being added to your skeleton army. So let's do the calculation from before. 14 skeletons, right? 14 skeletons with a average fire damage of what, around like 225? Let's say 225. Actually 230. So around 230 fire damage times 14 skeletons is 3,220 fire damage per rotation. And it might not sound like a lot, but consider this. Your skeletons are doing mainly physical damage, right? So anytime you come across a physically immune monster, you can apply amplify damage. You can try and break that resistance, but you're not really going to do a large amount of damage to a physically immune monster, even once they're broken, because they're still going to be at like 90% or 80% physical resistance. But Enchant applies a secondary damage type to your skeletons, which allows them to bypass the physical immunity and gives them a second damage type to kill those particular monsters that might necessarily be immune to physical. And it's actually a pretty cool way to beef up the damage of your army a little bit more. You could also potentially beef up the fire damage in those situations. Like, say, for instance, you came across a physical damage immune monster. Instead of casting amplify damage to break the physical immunity, you could cast lower resistance to enhance the fire damage. Basically, going a different route than, for instance, beefing up the physical damage, which might not necessarily even work depending on the physical resistance of the monster. And just in general, we're talking about a pretty nice little damage bonus. You could also potentially at some point get a last wish, and your mercenary could have a might aura. You could throw a bramble on the Act 3 mercenary and have thorns, which would definitely help the damage output of the entire group. So you could be running might, you could be running thorns, you could be running enchant, and then you could also put a flickering flame on him, so he could be running the fire resistance aura. And then I'm not really sure what you would put on for a shield, maybe just a spirit or something like that, or perhaps you could put something on to enhance his fire damage, maybe like I'm trying to think here, what's the name of that? A skull collector with like 3 fire facets in it or something like that could be interesting. There is a lot of options that you can have for an Act 3 Fire Merc, and it does come in handy to have all of your little minions enchanted, especially your revives. So if you think about a summon Necromancer, you got to think about the fact that he's going to enchant your skeletons. He is going to enchant the mages, but it doesn't matter because the mages will not apply the fire damage. But he's also going to enchant your revives, and those revives are also going to apply the fire damage. So you have a whole lot of monsters on the field of battle, including your golem, which is added into this. So you've got, 14 skeletons, you got 1, which is your golem, and then you maybe have like 20 or 30 revives, and all of that adds up to a whole lot of extra damage, which can be applied on a target at any given point. And as we talked about earlier with the raised skeletons, how do you focus their damage? How do you get all that fire damage applied to the target directly? And the answer was you teleport directly on top of the monster that you want them to absolutely annihilate. And you'll see that it takes a little bit of time though. So like your mercenary is going to take his time to obviously sit there and enchant each individual skeleton. So he's literally enchanting each skeleton as he goes. So it is a little bit of a setup period. And this does make him poor for something like Pindle runs or Trav runs, because it's going to take your Act 3 mercenary a little bit of time to get in there and actually enchant every single one of your minions. There's nothing wrong with that. And he's going to continually keep enchanting your minions as you battle. And you'll notice that the extra fire damage does make a pretty big difference on the output of your army. And it's a very easy way early on that you can add a relatively large amount of elemental damage to a low-level Necromancer. Like, say you've just hit Act 3 in normal difficulty, grab the Act 3 Merc, let him enchant your army, and I guarantee you it'll probably kill things faster than the Might Merc would, because the Might Merc is going to apply physical damage, whereas the Enchant Merc is going to apply elemental. But you do have to keep up, obviously keep upgrading him every single time you get a chance, because at the early levels, his enchant is going to scale pretty well. But when you get him at like level 25 or something like that, and then all of a sudden you're level 35 and he's still level 26, you want to go resummon him and hire him at a higher level so that his enchant keeps increasing every single time you level him up. And you also want to get him any kind of plus to skill equipment that you can. So any kind of fire skill equipment, any kind of plus to skill on his armor, plus to skill on his helmet. Make him a lore helmet. Make him a splendor if you don't have anything better. Get him a hex fire or a hell plague or something like that that has fire skills on it. Fire skills is just as good as plus to skills for him because all he has is fire skills. So any kind of fire skill equipment is going to beef up his enchant, and beefing up his enchant is going to beef up your army. Just as a quick kind of comparison, let's go over to my online character Godzilla, and let's take a look at his character's enchant. So he actually does have a maxed out fire merc. I use it on him because he's a conviction paladin. It just makes sense. And let's see what kind of damage his enchant merc would add to our army if we had him instead of the crappy one that we've got. Now he's using Ethereal's Might just simply because he needs enough strength to use the Phoenix Shield, which he doesn't even need to have on. There's a whole lot of silly things going on here. Let me swap his, I think it's the K-Hagen, and then the Spirit Shield. All right, so this is similar to what you might see on a merc like this. And let me move myself out of the way so you can actually see his equipment. He's got a sword, which you could replace with a Hexfire for +3 instead of +2. He's got the Flickering Flame, which is +3. He's got the K-Hagens, which is +1, but you could sneak in a +2 here to give him a little bit more. And then, of course, the Spirit is +2, so you've got a pretty nice level of enchant of level 44 with 321 on the top end, 276 on the bottom end. So let's do a really quick calculation, and let's see how much damage that would add to our character. So first, let's find the average. So 276 plus 371. 276 plus 371. Or 321, sorry. 321. Bink, bink. 597 divided by 2. So 298 is our average. So let's just round that off to 300 just so we have a nice even number. So 300 times 14 skeletons, right? Plus 1 golem, that's 15. Plus, say, 20 revives. So we've got 15, that's what? 35 minions. So times 35 minions is about 10,500 damage, and we could, of course, beef that up a little bit by throwing lower resist on the target, which would definitely help. And I'm not sure exactly how much that would beef it up by, but probably let's just give like about 30% extra for the lower resist. So you're looking at about 13,650 fire damage per rotation from having the enchant merc with like a giant army. Especially if you teleported directly onto somebody and you had them all attacking that person at the same time. It's not bad at all. It's definitely a nice little added bonus. And of course, you also get the 407% attack rating, which is going to ensure that more of their hits are actually landing on the target instead of missing. And I mean, look at the duration, 1,176 seconds. I mean, once your Enchant Merc gets it casted, it's probably not going to wear off anytime soon. I think I've gone over just about everything I can think of with the skeletons. In fact, the video has already been going for 32 minutes. There's really not a lot more to talk about. They are definitely very interesting creations, a very interesting ability of the Necromancer. And I think that most people that build skeletons usually end up either doing one of two things. Either they max them out completely and they try and get as high of a level skeleton as they possibly can, or they just get them high enough that they can use them for a distraction, which is another way that you can use the skeletons, of course. They don't have to necessarily be a main part of your damage. Instead, they could just simply be a distraction so that you can stand behind them and use Poison Nova, or stand behind them and use your Bone Spears, or stand behind them and use your Bone Spirits, or even just stand behind them and use Corpse Explosions. Whatever it is that you're using the summon skeletons for, the raised skeletons, they're definitely a very, very good part of the Necromancer's repertoire, and I think a lot of people love building an army of the undead. Anyway, as always, I do appreciate you guys and gals watching my videos, and keep watching.